Long exposure photos are one of the coolest kinds of photos you can take, in my opinion. Before I started learning about photography, I had seen these cool photos of what looked like a waterfall or stream frozen in time and wondered how to reproduce them. Surprisingly, this isn't as difficult as it might seem, especially when you have a camera you can move virtually anywhere you're allowed to. Today, I'm going to show you how you can get these done using one of my favorite kinds of cameras, a drone. Specifically, how to get this done using the DJI Mini 3 Pro or the DJI Mavic 3. Now, technically, you can do this with any drone and even any camera for that matter, but these two are what I'll be using for this tutorial. Fair warning, I'm going to be going as in-depth as much as I can, and if there are things in here, namely the photography triangle, that you don't understand, I'd recommend going and looking at a video that explains that if you want to, or you can simply just follow along with the settings I'm going to talk about. I also have to say that I am not a professional photographer of any kind, but I do understand the inner workings of a camera enough to be able to show you how to take these photos in a basic form. So with that all being said, let's get it started. First, let's start by talking about the things you'll need to know before you head to your nearest stream or waterfall to do this. The first thing you'll need is an ND filter, preferably a variable ND filter you can use to test out multiple f-stops before you move your drone into position and snap that long exposure photo. But wait, what is an ND filter, you ask? Well, the term ND stands for neutral density. What a neutral density filter does is cut the amount of light that is allowed to hit your camera's sensor in order to correctly expose your image in harsh lighting situations and in situations when you're using a slower shutter speed, which I guess are kind of one and the same. The filters I'll be using here are made by Freewell, and out of all the filters I have tried and tested, these are the ones that have worked best for me and have held up in the durability space. For the Mini 3 Pro, I have the Freewell Variable ND 2 to 5 stop, the variable ND 6 to 9 stop, and the standalone ND 1000 and 2000 stop, I guess, if that's the way to say that. For the Mavic 3, I'll have the variable ND 0 to 5 stop and the variable ND 6 to 9 stop. As I mentioned before, the job of an ND filter is to cut the amount of light that hits the camera you're using. You can see this here as I move the filter up towards the camera I'm filming with. If you are interested and don't have a particular filter you use, you can purchase one of these filters or all of these filters using the links in the description below. Fair warning, these are Amazon affiliate links, but they do also help me out. The second thing you'll need to know is how to get to and work with your drone's manual, or rather pro mode settings, and how to find the right ND filter. Specifically, how to get control of your ISO, shutter speed, and aperture if you can control this on your specific drone. On DJI's drones, you can get to pro mode settings for the camera by tapping on where it says auto here in the bottom right corner. This automatically switches you over to pro mode. Next, you're going to tap on this area here, and once this menu shows up, and assuming you've never been in this menu, you should at least see your ISO and shutter speed settings, and that they're currently being adjusted automatically by the software of the drone. If you're using the Mini 3, Mini 3 Pro, or any other smaller DJI drones, then you can change your ISO settings and shutter speed, but not your aperture. This is due to the fact that the DJI Mini series of drones typically have a fixed aperture that cannot be modified. In the case of the Mini 3 Pro, you have a fixed 1.7 aperture that lets in tons of light to the camera's sensor. A drone like the Mavic 3 also has the same Pro mode settings, but you'll notice here that you can choose the aperture value. This can be set anywhere between 2.8 and 11. Having the ability to control your aperture settings does allow you to potentially use an ND filter with a lower f-stop, and can even allow you to take these pictures without an ND filter if you're lucky enough and are in the right conditions. To reiterate one more time, the main parameters we are looking to set in this Pro Mode menu are your ISO and shutter speed. In order to gain manual control of these, go ahead and tap on the auto button under ISO. And what we need to do here is set the ISO to 100, since that will cut out the amount of grain in your picture, or it won't have any grain once you take it. You can also play around with these ISO settings, but generally the lower the value, the better the quality. Go ahead and turn off the auto settings for the shutter speed as well. When it comes to your shutter speed, you want to have this set to at least 1 second, or at least that's the sweet spot I've found. The idea with doing this is that we are trying to freeze the motion of the subject we're taking a picture of, which is obviously in this case a stream of water. One thing that you might have noticed is that setting the shutter speed to 1 second and beyond makes whatever is on the screen indistinguishable or really hard to see. And this is exactly where your ND filters come in. You might have been wondering why I've had my drone's camera pointed at my light this whole time, but it was all to get to this point here, so now you can see how choosing the right ND filter makes this all work. Right now, you can no longer distinguish the fact that my drone is pointed towards my light anymore, and this is because a slower shutter speed means a brighter image. Now, what I'll have to do is choose the right ND filter to make all of this make sense again. By default, your drone should come with some kind of protective filter on it. To remove it, place your hand on the camera assembly and then twist the outer part of that protective layer to the left. In order to fix the new ND filter to the camera, you simply align it with the camera and then twist it to the right. You can see here with my sample that now that I've fixed and found the right ND filter, there is an adequate amount of f-stop here, and I can now see my light here as opposed to before when I didn't have one on and I set my pro mode settings. Since the Mavic 3 does have a variable aperture, like I said before, you can potentially use a lower value ND filter, but this is still going to be heavily dependent upon the location you're taking a picture at. Doing this little test should give you a better understanding of how both your camera settings and ND filters work with each other to make things distinguishable to our eyes when we mess with our settings to give us a longer exposure time. Now, one more thing you should understand about how these settings and filters work together. What's happening in a long exposure photo is that the shutter of your camera is being held open for an amount of time you set. Since we set this for 1 second, then it will be open for that amount of time, but it is imperative also that you make it so that your drone is as still as possible, because even the slightest movements during this time can cause your photo to be blurry enough to make you unhappy with it. The third thing you'll need to know is whether you can actually fly legally in the place you'll be taking these photos in. Sure, it would be easy enough to just get up and go once you remember that really cool stream or waterfall you saw that one time, but you'll probably need to be there for a little bit, and you'll want to make sure you can be without someone or something trying to tell you you can't or you shouldn't. You might already know this, but you can check on this information by going through apps like the DJI Fly app, the Before You Fly app, or an app like OpenSky, to name a few. These 3 apps should give you information pertaining to the kind of airspace you'll be flying in and if there are any restrictions, but you can always find other apps that do the same or give you more detailed information, and it's always best to go ahead and check multiple apps anyway. Unfortunately though, just looking within apps like this isn't enough. You'll need to look out for signs or ask someone if you're entering a particular place that is attended by a human. I know of a few areas here that have some really cool waterfalls and streams, but I can't shoot or film there due to the restriction of drones in that area. Of course, you could completely ignore those rules, but you're doing so at your own risk, and if anything happens that is completely on you, I ain't taking responsibility for that in no way, shape, or form. The fourth thing you'll want to know is what the weather will be like at the location you're going to. I'm going to assume that everybody and anybody knows how to check the weather, but the reason this is important is because there are a couple of factors pertaining to weather that can either make it difficult or work in your favor to get the best results. For example, if the sky is overcast, then the camera on your drone will see things a little bit darker than compared to a bright sunny day. I like to call this nature's ND filter, and this could work out in your favor since the darkness of something like an overcast sky can potentially act like the f-stop of an ND filter and make it so that you wouldn't have to use as strong an ND filter in some situations if you don't own all the ND filters I own here. Another example of weather that can have an adverse effect on taking long exposure shots is wind. Since these long exposure shots are taken best when your camera is as still as possible, then wind, and especially strong wind, could potentially move your drone around too much, resulting in a really blurry, unusable picture. This is especially true when wind is accompanied by gusts, and of course, one of the factors when it comes to wind and gusts is the fact that it can move your drone enough for it to hit something and fall out of the sky, and nobody wants that. One technique I use to combat this is to be aware of just how much wind and gust is present in the situation. What you're looking out for is if the wind or gust is going at a constant rate, or is there a calm for a few seconds to where you can actually use that calm to snap a few photos while you know your drone is going to be relatively still. I think that pretty much covers all of the basics and everything you'll need, so I'm going to go ahead and head on location so I can show you how to do these on site. Okay, so I've arrived at the place where I'm going to be doing this, and I have to say that when I was thinking about where to do this part of the tutorial, there were a lot of places that I gave consideration to, lots of places that had streams or similar waterfalls. The reason I chose this place is because this waterfall here actually is a series of 3 waterfalls, at least as far as I've gone anyway. And each of these waterfalls we're about to see has their own different lighting due to the tree cover around here. And that basically brings together all of what I've been saying in this tutorial. So let's go ahead and move on to the first step. So of course the first thing you're going to want to do is find a place to set up and put your drone stuff down, your drone equipment down, and then unpack the drone you're going to use and the ND filters and all of that stuff. The next thing you're going to need to do is find the right ND filter for the situation. Now, keeping in mind the drone that I'm using here is going to be the Mini 3 Pro, and that has a 1.7 aperture like I said before. That means there's tons of sunlight that's going to hit the camera sensor, and right now the sun is starting to come out a little bit in certain areas of where I'm filming. So I am going to go ahead and choose the ND 1000 and see if that's adequate enough. But I will show you how I do this without getting in the air and having to waste time if I have to change out ND filters after the fact. Now, you're probably thinking that step 2 would be obvious, and that would be to put the drone up in the air and just start shooting away. However, I actually recommend against that. Since I just went ahead and fixed that ND 1000 filter to my drone, I definitely want to test it before I actually get the drone up in the air. So what I would recommend doing is turning on your drone, holding it and pointing it at the area you're going to take the photos at, then going into your pro mode settings, setting your ISO to about 100 or maybe at the most around 800, at least in this situation. Then dialing your shutter speed to at least 1 second, and then seeing what the image on screen looks like. This is not going to be an exact science because the bottleneck here is always going to be the type of screen you're using, and in this case I'm using the DJI, so what looks fine to me now could look bad to me later. I also try to think a bit ahead, and since it is morning, that means that the sun has not shifted over this area yet. So generally, I could use the ND 1000 I have on the drone right now. However, I don't want to limit myself, and I'm actually going to switch over to the ND 2000. That way, I won't have to take the drone down later, and at least I know I'm using the highest ND filter possible I can for the Mini 3 Pro, and can adjust around that. So I'm gonna go ahead and change that right now. Alright, so I did go ahead and change over to the ND 2000, and you're probably seeing that the left side over here is a bit darker than it was with the ND 1000. However, the sunlight has started to shift over here, so it looks like I might have been right about switching to that ND2000 filter. For now, what I'll do is make my shutter speed slower and adjust as needed. Now, we are pretty much at step 3, which is to essentially find an angle you like and just start snapping some pictures. My general rule of thumb here is to snap at least 4 to 5 pictures, maybe even more in certain situations. The reason I do this is because right now you're probably seeing that the drone is pretty steady. However, I do feel some wind around me, and I want to make sure that I take enough photos to up my chances of one of them coming out decent. Another thing I do like to do sometimes is just really mess around with the shutter speed, even if the exposure meter is going to say that I'm underexposed or overexposed. The idea here, for me at least, is that I'm probably not going to come back to an area like this anytime soon, because it's kind of far. It's not too far, but it's far enough. And I just want to get pictures at different exposures. I just want something that is going to be tangible and look decent. So you can also experiment with playing around with your shutter speed settings, is what I'm trying to get at. Really, you should just go ahead and take as many pictures as you want. These are just my rules of thumb. These are just the things that I follow. But really, not everybody's going to be as patient as I am. I would sit in a spot for, minutes on end, just trying to sort of line up the perfect shot, just trying to get my results the way I'd like them to. But again, that is up to you. I'm just giving you some guidelines here, of course. All right, so I think at this point I have way more than enough pictures of this part of the waterfall. So like I did mention, this area does have at least 3 waterfalls, at least ones I know of. And luckily today I didn't actually have to go up to the other one because I didn't want to take that hike with the Mavic 3 on my back. But right here, what you're looking at is the bottom part of this waterfall, and the sun actually is a little more, it's on the area, but it's not fully there. So this area should be evenly lit, and I wanted to show you all how this might differ when you have an evenly lit area as opposed to the one I showed you before. So let's take a look at that. So this part of this waterfall tends to be pretty dark because there are a lot of trees over it, and that's what I meant more by evenly lit. Of course, if I use that term wrongly, then I apologize, but what this is going to allow me to do is use an even slower shutter speed, and though this will make my picture brighter, it can actually exaggerate the effect of the water there, and sometimes you can get a better looking picture just by using a shutter speed that's even slower than 1 second. Of course, you can see here that I have my drone in position, and I'm just going ahead and doing the same 4 to 5 different shots. And really right here, this is just kind of a freestyle, but this is just something that I did want to show you all. And this will make more sense when I show you the results of everything that I've been doing here in the pictures that I'm taking while I'm at this waterfall. Oh yeah, and if you are wondering, I am still using the ND2000. I'm simply just adjusting my settings around how dark it is down here, and to my eyes, of course, this is going to look much darker, but to what you're seeing on screen here, the reason it does look brighter is because I am just going ahead and adjusting those shutter speeds. I just want to reiterate that. One thing that I definitely wanted to point out here, and you may or may not have noticed it, but you can see that the drone is shaking slightly. Now the gimbal is doing an extremely good job of not showing all of that motion. However, I can actually see it from where I am. And like I said, wind is going to make your pictures blurry. So one trick I've learned is to actually move the drone left or right very, very slightly, then press the pause button, which will actually pause it in place and keep it relatively still. This has actually helped me get some clear shots sometimes, so you can try it out if you'd like. What I also wanted to do here is use the Mavic 3 to take these kinds of shots, and honestly, by default, the Micro Four Thirds sensor in it is going to deal with shadows a lot better, so it might give you a little bit of an edge when you're looking at the screen to try to figure out whether your photo is going to look good or whether it's going to look whatever the opposite of good is. There's also the fact that you have aperture control, and this is definitely going to give you more flexibility in being able to capture these pictures easier, since you don't really have to worry about filters as much, I guess, maybe. Right now I'm using my ND 0 to 5, and basically I have it on 5, but I can also adjust the aperture as needed in order to take these photos. And truly and really, this is the big difference when using the Mavic 3. I don't think it's necessary though to go over every single thing we just did when taking a look at the Mini 3 Pro, but really all the same things apply here, so I'll just give you the short version of it. Find the right ND filter, and I guess one trick I can share with using the Mavic 3 or any of the Mavic 3s out there is if you put your aperture value all the way down to 11 and base your filter choice off of that, that will most likely give you more flexibility. Of course, the next step is to test everything out by pointing it in the direction of where you're going to fly if you can actually see it from where you are. Then get up in the air and start taking pictures. Of course, watch out for any gust of wind and make sure that you're adjusting your settings accordingly when moving to different lighting situations. And yeah, that was definitely a lazy way of explaining how to do this here, but I want to go home now, so I'm going to, and then we can take a look at some of the pictures that I got here and see how they came out. Okay, so I guess one really annoying aspect of doing it the way that I do it is going to be that you're going to have a ton of pictures here that are all going to be the same, but the way I do this is basically I'll just go through and see the previews, and you know, I'll try to look for any blurs or what looks the clearest to me, and then I just go from there and delete the rest, which I probably should get on that. I'll probably not do it, and this will fill up way quicker than I think. But anyway, that is my method to my madness. Let me go ahead and show you some of the pictures that were blurry, and that was due to the wind, of course, and then some of the pictures that I got that were clear. So the first thing I wanted to do is pick out a couple of photos that actually show what happens when the wind is moving your drone even ever so slightly. As you can see here, there are some parts of some of these photos that are kind of clear, but nonetheless you can actually see the blur. And this is why I highly recommend taking multiple pictures within the same place, moving your drone, and then pressing the stop/land button to basically hold it in place. And this is just my my method to doing this. Anyway, to the clear pictures now. So these are ones that came out pretty decent, pretty clear. I mean, of course, like I said, I am not a professional photographer, so someone out there is going to judge these, but I think the whole thing here is just to really be able to learn how to take these pictures, and you can always go ahead and fine-tune that skill, fine-tune the skill of getting these long exposure photos with a drone. Now you might see some differences here with the Mavic 3's photos, and that is because of the bigger sensor within it. But nonetheless, you can do these with any drone, and that's the point that I am trying to drive home. One thing I try to do to learn a little bit more about photography and when using a drone with a smaller sensor like the Mini 3 Pro is mess around with any editing tools I have available at the moment. Believe it or not, I use my tablet single-handedly to create all of the videos on my YouTube channel, and I find it to be a pretty decent tool when it comes to doing some basic edits. So here you can see with these photos, I tried to get a bit more detail out of the dark areas in the photos I took with the Mini 3 Pro. Now, of course, you could leave your photos the way that they are, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I just wanted to point out another part of my process in doing this. All right, so that is all I have for you on how to take these kinds of photos. And like I said, I am still sort of working at this. I am not perfect in any way in doing these photos. And is there really a way to actually be perfect with these photos? Like, sure, you'll always know things if you know things when you're a photographer, but you can't control nature and everything. Anyway, I do hope that this video did bring some kind of value. And I mean, I know that the example that I used in the area that I did go to was an extreme case, but I wanted to show you in the worst case scenario, or sort of in a unpredictable case, and have you go from there. Anyway, please let me know in the comments if there's anything that I did not explain correctly. This video has caused me a ton of anxiety putting together, and I hope that it shows that I tried. And I also didn't want it to be that long, which I guess is being made longer by me talking. But anyway, I'm going to end it here. Wherever you are in the world, Have a great morning, a great afternoon, a great evening, or a great night, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching, and get out there and go take some long exposure photos. They're really fun.